Okay. Let me tweet out the link. And my computer's immediately getting slower. Hooray.
Are you Mac or PC?
I'm PC. Year and a half old laptop.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's only a year old. It's not bad, but not the best either. Okay, tweet it out. So,
Alright, I'm going in. I'm muting. Alright, should be good.
Okay, I'm actually unmuting just so I can. So, you want to try talking right now for a bit?
Okay. Alright, let me know. Okay, I'm going in. I'm muting.
Okay.
Alright, should be good.
Perfect. Okay.
Good? Okay.
Yeah, we're good because I just unmuted it for a second. You may hear it, an echo of yourself from a minute ago, but it seemed like it came in clear enough.
No, that's okay.
Actually, you won't hear it, I think, because I have headphones on.
Yeah, no, I muted the YouTube link, so.
Oh.
Good.
That would do it. Cool. Okay, so we'll give people, I usually give them till about 5 minutes after to start. So yeah, just a general, like, guessing, sort of like trying to plot what we'll be doing. First part would be us going through, I guess some of the numbers there aren't as legible as I'd like. Let me increase the size of this a little bit. Sadly, for whatever reason, my streaming system does like shrinks some of the numbers and whatnot, so it's.
Oh, that's alright.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna do the whole zoom in thing, so actually it makes it better.
I'm working dual screen, so I can basically project the same. Yeah, so if I can't read anything, I'll just kind of.
Perfect. Okay, that's fine. And where's the other one? Oh, I have both up there. That's right. That should work. Anyone who's here, please say hi in the chat. But yes, general plan for tonight. First couple of minutes talking about where the aisles are, needs, and discussing discussing what their chances are, and the general topic you had the other day of whether they should go ON, or to some lesser extent. So first we'll discuss the Islanders and then whether we think they're in a place where it makes sense to do that. Then we'll discuss needs, and then we'll discuss some targets. And if we go on tangents, we go on tangents. Very simple.
Sounds like a plan.
Why is Tom Wilson trending?
He has 3 points tonight and boarded someone. So basically,
he's Tom Wilson.
Yeah.
Okay. Scum of the earth. Some days you think these players won't be in the league for long, and then Tom Wilson's still in the league for way, way, way too long.
Yeah.
Okay. For those of you who have tuned in, because I see there's currently 6 viewers, so some that maybe me and Carey just viewing our own stream, we'll be starting probably in about 3 more minutes, just for people to get in here. Yeah, so. Didn't even look at the standings last night to see how far we fell.
Still in third.
Still in third? Okay. Because the Devils beat Columbus, that's right.
We'll be falling tonight, though, if this score holds.
Washington. Well, we have like 2 games in hand on Washington.
Yeah.
So, and our next game is versus Pitt, so we can do that ourselves, I guess. Is that our first game versus Pittsburgh this year?
It is, yeah.
Oh, good God.
Every night's a dream.
Yeah. God damn the Metro Division. This is not fun.
No, it's really not.
That's I joked about it before the year, but that 6th place team in the Metro is totally going to be in the top 8 teams in the conference.
Really? Yeah.
You just know.
Really looks that way. Right now
it's the Rangers,
who are 3 points up on Montreal and 4 points up on Boston. Boston has 2 games in hand, but I mean, clear advantage right now.
And Carolina could pull it off too. You could actually.
Yep.
Just what an awful. Eesh.
Great playoff system.
Yeah, I mean, I if they add Seattle, I really want them to just go full divisional and just say F it. Just get rid of this wild card so you don't have stupidity like this.
Yeah, I mean, if they treated each division as a conference, then it makes a lot more logical sense to have it the way it is. I also think that, if they do that, then they need to go to more of an unbalanced schedule than they have right now.
Yeah. You add at least one more game for each divisional team.
Exactly.
And maybe drop a game or two against. I was actually just thinking about that as I was running the other day. Maybe like upping to making 1 game versus 2 of the other divisions/conferences, and then 2 versus 1 other division that rotates every year, and then everything else against your division. Winds up like 6 games versus everyone in your division, which might be a lot, but still.
I think that's fine, though. I mean, they had that 8-game versus the division format like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that might have been a little over excessive, but, I mean, the games are better.
Yeah. And fairer.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start in 10 more seconds. So, starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the 3rd, or really 4th, I think the first one was labeled 0, Isles Videocast of this season. Today I am joined by special guest Carey Haber, or Habermetrics5 on Twitter. Carey writes on... Are you on Isles Insight now? Where are you...
No, I was writing on Isles Nation for a while, and at this point I would say I'm just more of a casual tweeter.
Okay, casual tweeter, but also a good person to follow if you enjoy the Isles and some more analytical bent on Twitter, who also occasionally posts articles on some various sites, even if he's currently now not doing so regularly. The topic for tonight is inspired by a couple of tweets Carey sent out last week, basically arguing that the Isles should make a don't want to exaggerate too much, make a big play into the trade market and whatnot, perhaps going all in on trying to win the Cup this year. But before we get to that question, and we will get to that question very shortly, I think we should look at where the Isles are right now to try and assess that. So I have up here the puckon.net, which is a website that shows score-adjusted Corsi, and the Isles are basically dead in the middle. They were closer to 10th. They were closer to around 12th until last night, which was a total disaster in terms of their numbers for anyone who watched that game. And the less that's said about yesterday's game, the better. It was truly, truly awful.
Agreed.
But they're still in 3rd place in the division with games in hand on most of the other teams. So they're in reasonably good shape for the playoff picture right now. So Carey, since you made the tweets, why don't you, explain your thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, no, I'd like to. Obviously I made the tweet while they were at the peak of their recent run, where I think they won 7 of 8 games, and during that time I shot up the standings, and our to your point, in a pretty good position right now as it relates to the playoffs. And the more I thought about it, the more I think we need to pay attention to how important Matt Barzal has been for this team. Going into the season, I think there were a lot of mixed reviews about where the Islanders would be. I think the general assumption was they'd largely be a bubble team, which I think was fair at the time. But Barzal's emergence, I think, has been a bit of a game changer for them. And the stance that I took was really based more around their cap situation than anything else. So, I mean, it's no surprise that everyone knows what's going on with the team right now. John Tavares is a free agent at the end of the year. There's, important things going on off the ice that I don't want to get too deep into. But when you get or come into a situation where you get a guy like Barzal who's coming in and putting up basically a point per game as a 20-year-old rookie, and you find yourself in a situation where you have two number one centers making less than $7 million on the cap, that to me is a perfect time to strike. And this isn't something that I normally would recommend. I'm usually pretty conservative when it comes to things like draft picks and, comes to things like young players and prospects. They're inherently important to building a long-standing good team. But this is a gift. And, I think kind of learning from the experience of a couple of years ago where I recommended them, staying pat and kind of playing the course a little bit, I kind of feel differently now. Things have changed. Again, Tavares is a free agent at the end of the year, but they do have a lot of their top players are free agents over the next 2 years. And then things get a little bit dicey as it relates to the cap. And I think when presumably Tavares will resign, you're looking at a solid 3-year window from this year through 2020 where you're going to have two number one centers at the price of what two number centers should cost. And at that point, Barzal's a restricted free agent. That will, again, shift the cap situation for them. So really, I think this is mostly about just taking advantage of the cap situation they find themselves in right now. To me, just looking at it, it seems like it's a perfect time to pounce.
Yeah, so to add on that, I think we all now agree in retrospect that the Isles should have really thought about this 2 years ago. Was it 2 or 3 years ago now? I think it was 2 years ago, right? Those Franz and Okposo's last years of the team?
Yep, 2 years.
2 years ago. I had made the comment about 3 years ago when the Isles had that really great season that I thought the Isles window was 2 years, not 4 years, because I thought the Franz, Nielsen, Okposo leaving was as big a deal as the Tavares' contract running out. As it turned out, they wasted that second year, even despite not going all in. They sort of declined during that year somehow. Blame that on Cappy or whatnot. It just didn't work. But you're right. There's a lot of, ignoring Tavares here, because I think any analysis of the Islanders at this point, I think the team has to treat it this way. I think the fans have to treat it this way. Have to treat it as if you can get John Tavares to resign. If the team has any belief that that they wouldn't resign him, then I'd imagine he'd already be gone.
Agreed.
It would be totally insane to let him go without any thought that you could resign him. And I think that it's clear that, and I think like Steven Stamkos, that Tavares will resign and he'll drive us all crazy because he'll probably take way too close to free agency to do it. And then they have a number of other free agents. So Nikolai Kulemin, who cares? Jason Chimera, who cares? Dennis Seidenberg, good riddance. But then you're right. We have Josh Bailey, who I can't imagine they resign because I suspect he's going to get a big raise from somebody. You've got Calvin DeHaan and Thomas Hickey, who I think everyone expects at least one of which to be traded at this point. And then the year after that, you've got Anders Lee and Jordan Eberle becoming free agents, which is going to be rough. It's pretty weird to think that Anders Lee is the same age as Jordan Eberle, by the way. That's just strange.
Yes.
I know he came into the league later because of college, but
that feels like Eberle's been around forever.
Yeah, it really does. Oilers, just Oilers. Yeah, and then you've got the RFA years of Hosang and Beauvillier, though Beauvillier is another question mark there, also coming up in 2 years. So yeah, it definitely feels like this is a 2-year window again, with a lot of players, some of whom they won't be able to keep. Um, so I do agree with that. The interesting question is, again, with the standings, how they are. The standings, the Metro is a ridiculously tough division. The Isles are in decent shape to make the playoffs right now, but the Metro is so rough that if you go through a cold streak, you're sixth in the Metro, you're out of the playoffs, even if you're in the top of the conference. For those who got here when we said the stream was going to start, we were talking, it's looking really, really much like that is going to happen with the top team in the sixth best team in the Metro missing the playoffs despite being better than the third best team in the Atlantic. It just is what it is. There's no way about it at this point. The Atlantic is bad, the Metro is great. And if teams like the Devils keep overperforming, it's going to happen. So I can definitely see the argument. And the other issue is that they don't. The D prospects are there, but there aren't really any forward prospects left coming.
Right, and I think that actually brings up another point that needs to kind of tie into all of this, which is the ages of some of these guys that are signed long term. Obviously, looking at your screen right now, Johnny Boychuk is the most obvious one, and he's 33, and I think it's fair to say that at some point he is going to start to decline. Andrew Ladd is another example of someone who's over 30 and is signed long term. So you want to take advantage of years where these guys are productive and playing hockey that is even if it's not at the level of which they're being paid, a level of which a legitimate player of their age range, unrestricted free agent type age would be playing at, and they're getting that right now from both of them. And so it's one of the it's a weird year, to your point, because of the standings, and I think in another world where top 8 make the playoffs no matter what, they'd be in even better position and more primed to go all in. But
absolutely
right. But when I do think that's a fair caveat to make. A part of me is wondering, when you look long term, you're kind of granted this gift of Barzal's emergence. I don't know if I see another year where they would be better positioned to make a real run given the talent that they have, because even if they lose one of Bailey or DeHaan, let alone both, you're likely going into next year with potentially a weakened team at the start. And I'm not sure that, just frankly, I'm not sure that Garth Snow is creative enough or shrewd enough. He's made some good trades for sure, but when you start getting into things that require cap management and kind of thought process with that, I think that's one of the areas he struggles with most, to be honest. And I think there are some obvious examples that we can touch on to kind of bear that out.
Right. No, I think we can all agree on that.
Yep.
I'm looking at the Cal Clutterbuck contract right now, which is just killing me to look at.
Right. So if they're going to be in a position right now where no doubt they're going to have to run through a gauntlet, it's almost like, do you see over the next couple of years a year where they would be in a better position to make a run? And if the answer is yes, then I would say maybe hold off a little bit. But if the answer is no, they do have 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. So it's not like you're necessarily playing with any sort of deficit. I think that's a nice situation to have, and I'm definitely not advocating trading all 4 of those picks.
Right.
I think that actually allows them to have a little bit more flexibility in moving at least one of them to bring in a somewhat of an impact player.
No, I think that's right, and I think just thinking about the standings for this coming year, let's say in the future the Rangers decline further because Lundqvist is going to get older and they're still an old team relatively. But the Devils should get better, the Flyers should get better, the Canes in theory should get better eventually. Columbus should be at least equal. I guess Pittsburgh and Washington might start declining at some point, but there's no reason to think the division is going to get easier really in some anytime soon. And so you're wind up in a dogfight no matter what.
Right, exactly. And, I think when it comes to teams like the Rangers, Pittsburgh, and Washington, they've obviously been in this position now for about a decade each. And it's not one of those I'm kind of at the point where I don't want to assume that they're going to decline until it actually happens, because I
That's
think,
fair.
especially in the case of especially in the case of the Rangers, I feel like I've been saying this for quite a while, and here they are again. You're right, Lundqvist will eventually decline, and they will eventually end up in somewhat of a rebuilding phase. But I don't think that sort of optimism is a real strategy. When you think about it long term.
No, I think you're right there. And I think the Barzal development is definitely, the Isles during that great season 3 years ago. The big thing was that they had two clear great lines, with Nielsen centering the second one. Then they had a solidish third line. Why am I blanking? Who was the third line? It was
That was the kid line, the Lee Nelson
the
Strom
Lee
line.
Nelson Strome line. That's right. Which had a great year, and before two of those three guys declined pretty hard. Um, but the fact that they had that they had Franz firing on all cylinders, plus Tavares being John Tavares, really made that team really deadly. They also had Nick Leddy and Lou Verzanowski on fire that season. The Isles. Well, we'll get to the defense in a second. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. The fact that you have these two top centers, especially with Barzal being cheap for 3 years, because even if Tavares is making $11 million next year, that means you've essentially got two potentially top line centers for an average of $6 million each, which is still below average.
Right, exactly. And that to me is the real window right there. And I think when you look at, if you want to start comparing this team to the 14-15 team, because I've seen that a little bit on Twitter and things like that. The one thing that team didn't have is a player like Barzal, right? Like if they had a player like him, the sky would have been the limit. And that's actually a reason why I think, all things considered, the ceiling on this version of this team might actually be higher, albeit the floor is lower. And again, that's partially due to the defense, and we can get to that later. But to acquire a player like Matt Barzal midseason is practically impossible.
Yeah.
And they have that. Where you can acquire players is to fill out your lineup on your bottom six lines, which are basically an abject disaster for them right now. And if they're able to do that, they're in I think a pretty good position. I can't think of more than 3 or 4 center combinations that are as good as these guys. And when you have that kind of top end talent, you really set a pretty high bar for yourself, and they're primed to do some damage if they can fill out the roster.
Yeah, I mean, well, the Rangers don't really have more than one center. Pittsburgh obviously has got the obvious two.
Right.
So they're the clear one, fine. And of course, there's the defending champs, so that's showing you right there an example of that. Though Barzal has a long way to go before we can really putting him in that category as Malkin. Washington, who's Washington's 2C? I'm blanking at the moment.
Well, it's usually either Kuznetsov and sometimes Oshie, and that
Right.
Those guys. I mean, that's probably around the level that the Islanders are at right now. Just given the fact that Backstrom is continually underrated.
Backstrom is amazing. I think Oshie is. I'd take Barzal over. Would I take Barzal over Oshie? I think I would. But yeah,
It's close.
right. But and Backstrom is amazing. Backstrom is one of the better centers in the league. There's no question there. At least not to me. Yeah. And the Devils, well, we all think the Devils are kind of fluking it out a little bit right now, but Columbus has got a number of really good forwards right now, even though I'm never really sure which one of them is playing center.
Yeah,
I should really know Columbus better than I do.
it's like Wenberg plays up there a lot, and then Dubinsky. I think that generally is their
Is Dubois playing center?
Yeah, he's been. I actually haven't watched a Blue Jackets game in a bit.
His numbers are pretty incredible right now.
Yeah, he was at the beginning of the season. He was playing on the bottom six. I can't imagine Torts hasn't elevated him at this point, but it is Torts. So
he's with Panarin and Anderson right now.
Yeah, that sounds right.
They're about a 60% Corsi line. So
pretty good.
Yeah, they're the one young line that's sort of competing with the Barzal Lat Eberle line right now, pretty favorably. Yeah, I mean Columbus right now is sort of the team that the Isles would want to be, I think I'd say.
Yeah.
In that they don't have a John Tavares type game breaker player, but they have pretty balanced good players throughout the lineup, as well as a D that is, well, again, lacking any necessarily elite, though Zach Werenski might get there. Players, they basically are above average throughout. Columbus is sort of like that type of team the Isles could get to. Um, I'm a really big fan of Columbus this year, honestly.
Yeah, me too. And they remind me a lot of, just to compare it back to the Islanders, they remind me a lot of that 2015 team where their floor is just so high. Like, but the things that they're missing are the things that you're talking about. They don't have that game breaker. Bobrovsky is, but
Correct. They have Bobrovsky, which is
from a skater perspective,
right.
They don't. And I wonder if that will be the thing that essentially is their downfall.
It's certainly possible. And yes, Bobrovsky, I stand corrected, would be the game breaker that even the 14-15 team lacked.
Right.
So let's go into. So we talked. The bottom six, I think, is the clearest thing. It's the clearest thing to be improved on. Chimera, Clutterbuck, Quine. Quine. Let me get up to this number right here. It's pretty, I'd say, depressing how easily the bottom line just separating Corsi. Alan Quine, 38. Jesus Christ, Quine. Like, I keep expecting that number to go upward as he plays more games, but it's really not.
His game score is still negative, like, for the year. So that's pretty hard to do.
It really is. Clutterbuck has been awful. Hosang started really badly, but he's been in an upswing recently. Nelson's been bad throughout. Chimera's been bad throughout. It's kind of interesting to see Josh Bailey here. He's had a bunch of bad Corsi games recently, but I think that's more flukish than anything. And Cizikas has been like the only bottom sixer. I guess Beauvillier has been having a bunch of good games as he's back up there. I didn't even notice that.
Me neither.
Cizikas has been like the, for as much as Isles get mocked for Casey Cizikas, he's not that old. He's 27, I think, and he's been a reasonable third or fourth line center.
I think he's pretty underrated. I do think that there are holes in his game, as there are throughout any team's bottom six. But I actually saw a recent post on Islander Mania, the message board, where that kind of went into how his production per 60 is basically that of a second line player. And, you're dealing in limited minutes when you talk about, third, fourth line guys. But to get that level of production in that limited time from that type of, player in that position, I think is a pretty big advantage. And it allows for versatility throughout the lineup, which I haven't quite exploited. I think one of the things that had been discussed earlier in the year was, in the first home game of the season, he played with Hosang and I think Beauvillier or Hosang and Nelson.
Yeah.
And they were pretty good together. I think it's something that's potentially...
It was Hosang and Beauvillier, but yes, Cizikas has been surprisingly good when paired with skaters. I just called up his HockeyViz page. Yeah, you see he's on the upper level of the third line in terms of EP scoring the last couple of years. He's actually played well with guys like Hosang and Beauvillier.
Yeah.
Like, I used to complain when guys like Strome would be put on the fourth line with him, but now I kind of... Because Nelson has just not been good with those guys. It's been better of late, and Nelson sort of needs those guys to score, because he's basically been garbage without Hosang scoring-wise, which has, of course, been a problem.
Right. And there's a comment in the chat right now about the penalty kill without Cizikas, and I think, I think the penalty kill is low key one of the biggest issues with the team right now that nobody's talking about.
Oh, it is. I'm on HockeyViz right now, so let me pull that up. The one I had before from the other day. It's depressing. So this is the for those of you who aren't familiar with HockeyViz, in which case I don't know why you're watching. This is a chart showing the y-axis of the vertical part of the graph is how many shots you basically give up per minute on the penalty kill, and the horizontal axis is your power play. And the Isles are one of the three worst. on the penalty kill and one of the three worst in the power play. Yeah, it's if not for a few crazy outliers like Columbus in the power play and Winnipeg in the penalty kill, we are just woof. Oh, good God.
I'm getting Buffalo in 2015 flashbacks right now.
Yeah. I think Buffalo last year had a pretty hilariously awful penalty kill, which is also a fun little, like, what the hell? Why are they 10 shots worse than everyone else? This year it's the Jets, who are good enough everywhere else. They're sort of getting away with it. But yeah, the Isles have been downright awful in the penalty kill. And the power play, they have not been good either, though they've been scoring lately. I mean, the Isles' power play is basically John Tavares and Matt Barzal can make things happen even if they will suck for most of the power play, which is true. But you can't really do that in a penalty kill.
No, and two with Cizikas, I mean, obviously we know that since he's been out, they've let up a ridiculous amount of goals, and I think obviously part of that is just, noise and coincidence. But one of the things that I've noticed that he's really stepped his game up with this year is his defensive play. So his Corsi is remarkably average in basically every way that you look at it. But there was one game this year where they were home against Edmonton, and Waite had that line matched up against the McDavid line all game. And I was, frankly, dumbfounded by this. Cizikas against McDavid went 4-4-5 against, and McDavid without Cizikas on the ice was at 67%. It's very short sample, don't get me wrong. But to me, that shows that when you are looking at a player who can fill out the bottom of the lineup and can play against anyone, this is a guy that you want. And the fact that he's now going to be missing for 3 or 4 games and potentially more, so it's a huge loss. And it's frankly, of anyone in the bottom 6, he's the guy that I think is the most stable there and the guy that's most missed right now. And so.
I think that's pretty clear. I just called up, and it'll probably pop up on your screen in about a minute, the Corsi against per 60 of each of the Isles forwards, and Cizikas pops up in 6th, basically tied for 4th on the team. Basically, it's the Barzal line up top, and then you've got Lee and Tavares and Cizikas next up, and then you've got a whole bunch of mess below them with Alan Quine allowing 1 billion shots against, Jason Chimera unsurprisingly being second worst, and then you've got Nelson, Hosang, Beauvillier. But Cizikas is a very solid middle of the road there, which is good because he's not a great player, so you don't expect more than that. Good God, Alan Quine, just get him off the team, seriously. Like,
that's really remarkable.
He's been really bad. It's just.
That goal is going to buy him a lot of time.
The overtime goal, yep. I was like so upset when he healed faster than expected from his injury.
Was he this bad I don't recall him being this bad. He was
pretty bad last year.
This seems like dramatically awful.
He was pretty bad last year. I basically said like him and Prince really were garbage last year here. Pulling up the relative numbers last year. It was bad. I mean, it wasn't this bad. It was a negative 3% relative Corsi instead of negative 11%.
Yeah.
But, still not good.
An area of opportunity.
Yeah, and in fact, it's funny, he was worse defensively, relatively, according to Natural Stat Trick, last year than he was this year. He just got more shots on net. So, yeah, defensively he's awful. And he's basically playing fourth line center instead of Casey Cizikas. So that's a problem. So yeah, you'd like to ideally upgrade, I think, 3 slots in your bottom 6. Because I think Hosang, you expect to get better. And,
yep.
And if he's not, well, you've got other problems, but you have to hope that he gets better. And he shows flashes. I think Cizikas, you're hoping he comes back soon, fine. You can't get rid of Clutterbuck. He's untradeable. So as much as I'd like the Isles to cut him or whatnot, they're not going to get rid of him, and you got to figure Beauvillier is going to but let's ignore Clutterbuck. So one of Clutterbuck Beauvillier is going to play every day. And the only reason I don't list Brock Nelson in there, and I guess I could do the same thing with Beauvillier as Nelson, is that with Nelson, I would expect if they are going to try and make a deal, Nelson might be one of the players they be sending the other way.
I think that's a fair assumption. I think it generally seems like they've kind of soured on him to some degree. Just given the fact that he's really had no time with Barzell, and obviously a lot of that is because Andrew Ouellette has played very well.
He's been the most underrated player on the team this year.
I totally agree with that. But they didn't even really give Nelson a shot there, and I think part of that is, I mean, look, he's a restricted free agent at the end of the year. You want to talk about cap casualties, he's basically one of the first guys that is going to walk right out the door if he wants to be paid at a 20-goal player salary. And so, I mean, I think just given that, it seems like if they are going to swing a player for player trade, then I agree he's probably going to be the first one out the door.
Yeah, from the forwards at least.
Yeah, of course.
So that's the forward core right there. Defense-wise, defense. So defense-wise, there's Dennis Seidenberg, who I think everyone would agree there's no reason why Dennis Seidenberg should ever be playing. Right now, it's kind of comical. Every bit of number is hilarious with Seidenberg. I mean, it's my favorite thing is you sort it by Corsi against for 60, and you got Pulak at 49, you got a Hickey at 51, then you got 5 guys from 58 to 61 shots against, and then you got Seidenberg at 69. It's like, good God, like, you have been awful defensively.
Can we talk about Pulak for a second? Because sure. I feel like he's just generally criminally underrated at this point. I'm not convinced that he's like the bee's knees per se, but he's been really good basically every time he's been in the lineup, and they seem allergic to giving him a regular spot. Now, that may be changing now. He actually played top 4 minutes last night, but I'm not sure I am understanding what I'm missing with him. I feel like he's good.
I think they basically have got this feeling. I mean, for some reason, they seem way too decided on Adam Pelech, which is another story. But they basically have this feeling that they can't tell between Pulak and Mayfield really who's a better option. And Mayfield has played very solidly throughout, so I don't want to knock Mayfield here, who has done as much as the Hours could have expected. And then they don't want to, Letty and Boychuk guarantees in the lineup. DeHaan, surprisingly, has been a guarantee in the lineup. I kind of expected him to be scratched more than Thomas Hickey. And Hickey, of course, has been scratched a bunch. And so I sort of get the feeling that, and I still don't know why Seidenberg plays from time to time, because they clearly seem to think he was the worst defenseman to start the season. And then he started playing in bunches, and then he'll disappear for bunches. I don't get it. There doesn't seem to be any logic when Seidenberg comes in and when he doesn't. I get Mayfield against tough teams. I get Pulak when they're struggling for offense. I don't really see what games make them think we need Dennis Seidenberg.
I think this is a little bit. I think this is actually kind of a tough spot for Waite, just because the way that the roster is constructed. Obviously, that they have 8 defensemen on the roster right now, and I don't. He's obviously been here for quite a while. He basically potentially was part of the conversation that kept Matt Donovan out of the lineup for 30 games at a time. And just the way that he seems to approach his coaching style seems to be very communicative and transparent. And I think part of it is just him wanting to keep players game ready and fresh. And recently with Seidenberg, it's kind of been like he's, played a game and then a sat 3 and then he's back in. And I think part of this, and I think Staple actually alluded to this in his article today about how potentially this 8 defenseman situation is becoming a little bit untenable and what that could potentially mean. And, hopefully it doesn't mean Pulak gets, sent down. But
I don't think it does.
Oh no, he's waiver eligible, so yeah, it won't. You're right. But I do wonder, like, if just he feels like as the coach that he needs to get these guys into games, and that's kind of how you end up with him playing, almost, once every 3 games. I just think this is a roster situation that should be rectified. To me, it's tough because obviously Seidenberg has probably saved his own career to some degree by housing Barzell.
Right.
I don't know, what their stance is on him and or whatnot, just organizationally. They obviously re-signed him for a reason. But to me, this is just the coach that's trying to keep his guys fresh as much as possible. And it's very clear he's playing less than everyone else in terms of actual, minutes and games and whatnot. But
he definitely is.
Not sure.
I mean, it's funny. Pulak's not in danger. I haven't looked at the numbers. Pulak's not a Group 6 eligible free agent if he doesn't get enough games, right? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think he would need another year, but I could be off on that.
Yeah, I mean, I assume we'd have heard if he was, because they would not want to lose him to free agency, and they have made some panic free defenseman signings in the past when they thought they might lose a guy like Brian Strait to such a free agency. And I haven't seen any sign of that. Yeah, I mean, Pulak has been very solid. I've liked his neutral zone play. I've liked his rushes through there. I saw someone try comparing to Nick Leddy because I had my really, really tiny sample size my first neutral zone post. Pulak was also similar to Leddy in that, but I think he had like 5 games my sample size at that point. So small sample sizes do weird things, but he sort of settled back to mid-level. I mean, put it this way, at worst case, I can see Pulak being like Thomas Hickey. In worst case, and I think he's better than that. And I think Hickey is very, very solid. I mean, I think again for this discussion about going all in and whatnot, I think I would be stunned that if one of DeHaan or Hickey isn't traded. They clearly don't think they can resign DeHaan. It's not like the Tavares situation. The indications are all there that they cannot resign DeHaan.
Agreed. Yeah, he seems to be gone.
Yeah.
Which honestly, that was a weird decision. At least from where I was sitting, they had it seemed like a situation where the player wanted to stay, and it seemed like the team didn't really want him long term. I know he's obviously struggling a little bit in terms of just his Corsi percentages here, but he's been really solid all around for quite a few years now. So a little bit of an interesting decision there. But to your point, I mean, he's definitely a candidate to walk. I think between the two, Hickey is incredibly more likely to be traded.
Interesting. I would have thought the other way.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I think that they're expecting to lose DeHaan, and so I think DeHaan is more likely to be traded, whereas Hickey, I think they probably think that the market for him isn't so big, and so they can probably re-sign him. I mean, I could be wrong.
I think that's fair. I struggle with the notion that they're going to move a guy who they clearly see as a top 4 defenseman off the team this year.
That's fair. I mean, I think it's clear. I mean, just going to the general state of the defense, if we ignore Seidenberg, the defense this year is basically 6 guys who are somewhere around the range of average, from slightly below to slightly above, and no one really standing out, but no one really dragging the team down other than Seidenberg.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you can get away with that on a team going for the cup is another question. I mean, that 14-15 team had 2 defensemen in a Nick Leddy, who was looking like a potential superstar, which he hasn't quite lived up to, and Lubomir Wisnowski, who was criminally underrated throughout his whole career. There isn't really a guy like that this year. I mean, Leddy shows signs, and then, as I think we said before this cast started, and then he also has games where he just isn't there. There isn't really a consistent number 1 D on this team. But I mean, I think you have to make compromises somewhere. And I don't think I think getting a higher level defenseman will be great. I think having nobody who's clearly a deficiency is not really the point where it should be if a player becomes available, you look at it. But if a player, but it's not your first target.
Yes, I agree with that. And I know the player that everyone is thinking about right now is Oliver Ekman-Larsson, right? He's the guy that everyone's like, is he available? Is he not available? I don't know. But, if a player like that hits the market, then yes, by all means, this is a guy that you should probably look to acquire if you're, truly trying to make a Stanley Cup run, and he's signed for next year. But if a player like that doesn't hit the market and you're left with kind of, just your average trade deadline, run-of-the-mill, mediocre guys, no, I probably wouldn't make a move. And the other thing to consider there is they're actually they're pretty good organizationally in terms of where they are defensively. They do have Devin Taves and Bridgeport, who a lot of people are really high on. I don't know how he's going to translate to the NHL, but his skating seems to be there, which is certainly one step in the right direction. There are a few other guys. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to add to that. Yeah, you're right. There are a few other guys. I think Sebastian Aho is the other big one who could be in the league as soon as next year, just because he's basically age-wise closer to Taves than the other kids.
Yep.
But yeah, defense-wise, I think we spoke about the lack of outgoing forwards coming up because I think the highest, probably the best forward prospect they have right now is probably Kiefer Bellows, and I'm not that high on him right now. Whereas defense-wise, you've got, just in the AHL alone, you've got Taves and Aho, neither of whom may be stars, but both of whom show at least probable third pair or better performances. And you've got Mitch Van de Soppel and Parker Wotherspoon, who both could have much higher upsides. You've got defense prospects, so you definitely can. You're not really as urgent. Just to respond to a chat comment here, I think Chris Letang is more of an above-average defenseman than any of the Isles defensemen right now. Though he may have been injured for most of the playoffs.
I don't think he played. I think they rolled their number one pairing last year was like Justin Schultz and Ian Cole.
Okay, fair enough.
Or Dumoulin. Yeah, I mean it. I think that's
Ian Cole's available.
He is. That is not one of the guys I was talking about where you try to move mountains to get him.
No, it's not. Yeah, no one's so Pittsburgh that interested in trading with us right now. Yeah,
but I think Pittsburgh is it's kind of funny to put the Islanders in that sort of conversation, but that's the team where you talk about having two number one centers and a defense that's decidedly average, stylistically and construction wise. That's pretty much kind of where they're at right now. So, I know a lot of people are like, I can't believe you're going to compare the Islanders to the two-time Stanley Cup champions. And that's not quite the point I'm trying to make. More so that when you do have the type of players that the Islanders have, playing 35 minutes a game at center, to your point, you can compromise in other areas. And to me, this is a clear area where I think a lot more panic is being, commented on right now than is necessarily needed. To your point, there's not really any real liabilities here that are playing regularly, and because of that, I wouldn't be in an entirely large rush to make a move there.
Yeah, I think you're right. The Penguins are really a good comparison because for years, for about a 3 or 4 year period, ranging from the end of Shero's era to the beginning of the Rutherford era, they had the top two lines, which had amazing numbers whenever they were on the ice, and then you had a bottom two lines that were just dreadfully awful, and so their underlying numbers would look pretty average. And those top two guys would inevitably drag them to like the Eastern Conference Finals, where they'd fall a little bit short. And then Rutherford built a third or fourth line with guys like Cohen and Winnick, who made sure that the team wasn't being dreadfully beaten every time the top two centers were off the ice. And so, yeah, I do think it's actually a very good model. I actually think that's really reasonable. And, of course, I guess we have the goalie situation, which I guess we can compare us to Marc-Andre Fleury right now, and lacking a Matt Murray. So that's the last topic before we go into targets, because we have different opinions on this right now. So Halak and Grice have been dreadful so far.
Yes. Just bad.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and just to that point, I think we kind of were talking about this before we went on the air. Goaltending is inherently volatile. You show me a good goalie this year, and I'll show you the same bad goalie next year. We're basically living that in real time this year, and I think we do differ on this a little bit. I think this is certainly not a situation where I would move a top 60 pick. I wouldn't trade any first or even second round pick to bring a goalie in, but to me, you're looking at if this team could just get league average. I mean, you look at they're 898 right now. If this team could just get league average goaltending, they would probably be at where Tampa Bay is right now, close to 40 points. And I don't need a guy that's going to be here for 5 years. I don't need a guy that's going to be here for 2 years. I need a guy that can come in and play to league average levels for 4 months. And if they get that, I truly think that they will be in such great position to make a run.
Yeah. So I mean, my thing with both these goalies is I expect both of them are numbers well below their career averages, and so I expect both of them to regress positively. Now, whether they regress below the league average, I don't know. Goalies can fall off a cliff pretty quickly in terms of aging, and 32, while not old, is definitely the point where most goalies decline, and they can decline pretty harshly. And both Halak and Greiss are basically the same age. The issue is that I'm not like. There's always a bunch of goalies on the market, and they wind up going for either. Goalies tend to either go on the trade market for either way too much or way too little. There's never in between.
Yep.
It's kind of hilarious, and so you don't really. I'm never really quite sure. It depends on what's available and for what. I'm just thinking teams who are bad who might have goaltending. Florida's not trading either their goalies. Not that they could. Vancouver could trade Nilsson, I guess, which would be kind of hilarious.
The rejuvenated Anders Nilsson.
Yeah, don't really think that's in there. Buffalo could trade Chad Johnson again. I don't really think so.
Oh, please stop!
I'm just saying right now here. Everton could trade Brissois. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Brissois. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's French. And I don't think he's that good. Just looking at some bad teams.
There's three that I thought of that I think they could potentially look at. The first one is, you're on him right now, Antti Raanta, which is, I'm not sold that he's definitely better than Greiss or Halak, but again, if you're looking for a short term, hey, he could come in and potentially play pretty well. That's definitely a guy that you could look at, and obviously given Halak's unrestricted status at 28, potentially is a guy that you look to re-sign in the short term. Sure. The next one would be going back to Buffalo, Robin Lehner. That one I'm a little bit less bullish on. I'm just not sold he's that good.
That's too much. That's a lot of money too.
Yeah. And then the third one, not a lot of people are talking about him, and I don't think that he would have any real desire to come east, but it's actually Ryan Miller, who's played really well for Anaheim this year, and he's old, don't get me wrong, but it would be up to him and his family, but it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if you are looking for a chance to win before you ride off into the sunset, is this a situation where you would consider coming in for a couple of months and we'll just take a shot in the dark on it?
Yeah, Ryan Miller is interesting. I mean, he's always had issues. I mean, he went out west for a reason. It was personal. So
yeah, and I don't have high expectations because of that reason.
That's certainly there. And I keep forgetting Anaheim's kind of awful this year, so they'd be a trade target. And holy cow, they have a lot of free agents next year. I did not actually notice that. That's an interesting team to talk about. I mean, again, it depends on who comes available, whatnot. They don't want to repeat the three-headed goalie situation of last year. 2 years ago? Or last year?
Last year.
Feels like 2 years ago now.
Really does.
Yes, they don't want to repeat that. Backsmasher, I don't think Toronto's trading either of their goalies at this point. Pickard would actually not be a terrible person, but I don't think Toronto. I think Toronto's quite happy with Anderson and Pickard as their two goalies, and I don't see any reason for them to deal either of them because Pickard isn't costing very much. He got waived, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't see the reason for them to. All these teams have reason to try trading somebody. I just don't think Miller would be willing to go anywhere, but certainly he's a person who could. And Ranta would have reason to. Ranta obviously has no problem playing in New York, assuming he's healthy. Yeah, I mean, I could see it. I just think that they're basically locked into two goalies. I don't think they have any takers for either of them. And so unless one of them gets injured, I just don't see them managing to add another goalie without causing another three-headed goalie situation. And I don't think they want to waive. Like, I feel like this team, for better or for worse with this team, for better or for worse, this team does not really treat its finances as if players can be basically buried and just as if the money didn't mean anything. When players cost money, they play them. And so I think, the closest thing to that was Halak being waived last year and being down there, and I think they think that was a mistake.
I think you're right. The thing that concerns me about Grace is his Islander numbers. So if you go to his player profile on Hockey Reference, his Islander numbers are now regressed back to his total career average. So, obviously I think his first year is 925, and then he went to 913 last year, and this year he's, at 890. I do think it will go up from 890. I really can't imagine a scenario where he finishes the year there, but
yeah, 914 is his career and his Islander average, and I think that's probably a fair guess for where he winds up.
Yeah. Well, if he finishes at 914 this year, that would definitely.
Well, no, I'm talking about going forward. If he finishes at 914 this year, it means he's putting up 920 for a good portion of the season, which the Islanders would be very thrilled with. But
yeah, I don't see that either. So I'm a little concerned that this is just like the crash and burn year, so to speak, and it's certainly possible that he comes back next year and is perfectly fine. But if we want to be looking more short term, it's a tough situation because, to your point, you don't want to recreate the three goalie situation, and you don't. What's the point where this becomes too much? We're almost 30 games into the season now, and the team has an 898 save percentage. So where's the line where you go, okay, it's just not going to happen with these guys if we're going to win anything this year? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's a question. Unlike the forward situation, it's going to be a lot more dependent upon who's available, and and that would be the only. It's more out of the Isles' hands, really.
Yep.
And so they may just have to hold on for dear life. Again, I think that there's reason to think holding on for dear life will result in positive results. Unlike some of the bottom sixers, where I think playing Alan Quine at this point and playing Jason Chimera at this point is just basically, doing the same thing repeatedly and hoping for different results. The definition of insanity.
Noted penalty killer Jason Chimera.
Yes, noted penalty killer Jason Chimera. It's amazing how he has proven every complaint that people had about the Isles signing him pretty much right. And it just pains me because when he managed to go on that late scoring run at the end of last year, he might have been a tradable for something like a reasonable level pick in the offseason. But since he's not scoring worth a lick right now, I suspect his trade value is nothing. If you can still trade him for a sixth rounder, I would still do it. But, it's probably could have gotten better than that in the offseason.
It's tough because, a player like that, they put up 20 goals and you're kind of okay, I can live with these deficiencies if he's going to score 20 goals. And then everyone knew that his shooting percentage was going to regress this year. I'm not necessarily convinced that everyone knew it was going to convince down to, the levels that they're at. And I'm sure it will. He'll score a couple more goals, but the way that he's playing right now is bad, and it's objectively hurting them. It's at the point where the way that Waite rolls his lines, a tactic that I generally agree with. I mean, I do agree with the time on ice for the most part. It's one of the things that I think he does extraordinarily well. It's basically linear to production. But even playing 11 minutes at the level that he's playing at is just, you just can't live with it at this point, and it's becoming really problematic for them. 2.4 this year. That's something.
Yeah, it's something right there. 2.4. Yeah. It's a problem. And you're right. Waite has been, for the most part, a meritocracy. Barzal has played increasing minutes as the season's gone on, and I think quite clearly he's the number 2 center in terms of average minutes per game right now, and it's pretty clear on that. And then you have Nelson being third, Cizikas being fourth, and I think Cizikas would be higher if not for his injuries. I mean, I would have played Cizikas more than Nelson at this point, but I think they're still hoping for more from Nelson than they're getting.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think a reasonable hope. I don't think it's likely, but I understand with Nelson you sort of have the atmosphere that you need him to be doing better, so you just sort of have to roll with it and hope it improves. It's nice to see Jason Chimera is the least amount of time on ice per game right now, which surprises me because I actually didn't realize. It feels like he's on there for defensive situations more than he should be.
Well, he is.
I mean, he is. But the time on ice number suggests that he's not getting as much minutes as I think he is. But I could be wrong on that. I mean,
I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing in a sense. If you're noticeably that bad in that little time.
Yeah, well, he's pretty damn awful right now.
But either way, I mean, if you look at the time on ice, I mean, this is almost to a T how I would draw it up. If you asked me before the year, how should the time on ice look? This is certainly a lot more straightforward and linear in terms of production than we really ever had under Capuano. So I think, when you evaluate Waite, this is a real nice feather in his cap.
No, that's definitely true, and he's definitely not finishing the fourth line. In fact, he had one game, I don't remember which game it was, where for the first 2 periods, he was literally going in order, the lines. He literally spent the first period going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But I think 1 came out, so I think 4 may have been skipped a few times. And I really like that, and I don't see teams do that very often, and I don't think he's done it against Sims. But it was particularly noticeable because I was looking, when you track, you kind of notice these things. Because you have to see who's on the ice at all times. I don't think he's done it since, but at the same time, you are seeing reasonable. It's funny with the defense, similarly, I guess, because none of the defensemen stood out. He's also been very splitting the time pretty damn evenly. Leddy's leading the team at 22 minutes per game, which is nothing for a top defenseman right now. For better or for worse, no one's being ridden into the ground.
Which I like. I mean, it's December, right? There's not really a real reason to be, and I think he gets this as being a former player, and he was actually, he did an interview with Sports Illustrated that came out today, and one of the things that he talked about was just trying to keep guys fresh, and it kind of goes back to the conversation about Seidenberg earlier that we had, but one of the things that I think is really important for them is that they don't drive these guys into the ground if they are, trying to make a run. And when you do look at this, you don't see anything absurd like guys playing 26, 27 minutes in December. And I think, maybe towards the end of the year, if, it's needed, then maybe some of these guys will be more fresh to do that versus in previous years where, I mean, obviously as a longtime fan, Adrian Aucoin is the big one that comes to mind, but, you don't want to burn these guys into the ground and be left with, either burnt out players or depleted defense because they get hurt. So especially these days, keeping guys, healthy and fit is, I think, taking a greater importance, and to see that kind of reflected in how they're playing, but still in a way that's conducive to production and roles on the team, I think this is a really hard thing to do, and he's done really well at it.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, I think we both like what Wheat's done for the most part. Um, so anyway, let's talk about targets because I feel like that's the final step here.
Sounds good. I know you had a few that you kind of were projecting before you went on, and they really range the gamut from high price guys to low price guys, and there's certainly a lot of options for them, especially given their cap situation. They do have plenty to spend, and Kuhlman on long term injured reserve potentially remains an option if he isn't going to be back. So I'll kind of cede the floor to you here.
Okay, like I said, there's two types of targets you think about here. There's the higher price guys who you need to give up a little bit more for, who could maybe. I mean, I don't think the Isles at this point are altering their first two lines for anything because Lad's been so good. Like I originally, when I was originally thinking about this a few weeks ago, I have thought if they got a higher level guy, they could say drop Lad to third line. But I think they'd rather put the higher price guy on third line and not touch Barzal, Everly, Lad until maybe they have a run of games of poor play because that line is just on all cylinders right now. Sort of like Bailey Lee Tavares, which they had Everly up there to start, and they eventually were like, Bailey Lee Tavares was too good a line to drop like this. So the like high profile guys I was thinking of. So the first two I was thinking of. So we basically have a bunch of teams that we expect to be sellers. You got the Oilers, you got Arizona, you got Florida maybe, you got Minnesota, you got maybe the Flyers, you got Buffalo, and you got maybe Colorado and Detroit. Is that everyone I picked up here? Yeah, and Detroit. I think those are the teams that we could pretty clearly identify as likely sellers at this point. Am I missing anyone obvious?
The only one I could think of is Ottawa, but they're kind of weird because their division is so bad. I'm not even sure that they'll convince themselves that they're out of it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think that I think that Ottawa's media situation and their success last year is going to be one of these situations where they convince themselves that the turnaround is coming, even though last year it looks more likely to be a fluke before it collapses. So I think Ottawa's likely to be like the year after Colorado team that just uh, isn't isn't selling at this point. Um, but yeah, I think those are the teams in there. So I was thinking in terms of the higher profile guys. Obviously, you have a guy like Ryan Nugent Hopkins, who is probably about an average second line center at this point, which means he would then be your third line center to increase the third line center depth. So that would allow you to say push Nelson permanently to wing and maybe roll a third line of Nelson, RNH, Hosang, and then a fourth line of Cizikas, Pavillier, and Clutterbuck. Um, I think Chimera's got to be the guy benched, and the first guy benched in any of these situations. Whether they do that or not, I don't know. But so that would be like an RNH type guy, or another guy who, if you ignore the non-hockey aspects, which are considerable, but Evander Kane might be another type of player who's unrestricted free agent coming this year. Reasonable, pretty good scorer, um, despite being on a pretty awful Buffalo team, and a reasonable possession player. I think Evander Kane's a wing, right? He's a winger. So
Right.
with Kane, you're then say winding up with say Kane, Nelson or Pavillier center and Hosang as your third line. I don't know. That would sort of be what you'd go for there. And then the third guy I'd bring up, and I brought this up before, and this is probably a pipe dream, would be Eric Stahl. Stahl, unlike the other two guys I just mentioned, has 2 more years on his contract left. Now, he's much older than those other guys. He's mid-30s. But at the same time, he's been a positive possession player for years and still is this year. And he's very good at that this year. His scoring numbers in general are at worst average. Even when he played for the Rangers and the Rangers media made him sound like an awful player, he had good possession numbers and scoring numbers that would generally be thought of as, say, third line center-ish, which is where he'd play in the Islanders. And he's actually up to scoring numbers since they're leaving the Rangers. In fact, he's shooting more this year than he has since he left Carolina, which is interesting. Now, Eric Stahl's got a $3 million contract for 2 years, and so Minnesota, which I suspect does not think of itself as in a rebuilding phase, and thinks of itself as trying to recover from this for next year, may say they would want some high-priced assets. Because, I mean, I think Buffalo and Edmonton would not have that high prices for Kane or Nuge. Because both those teams are, Edmonton seems to want Nuge out of town, and Buffalo probably needs more than another year, and both those guys are expensive, and both those teams probably have other things they need to do. So I think both of them could be acquirable for something like, say, Brock Nelson plus a pick, or Brock Nelson plus a defenseman prospect. Certainly in the case of Edmonton, that seems to be something that they should be interested in.
Yeah, Nuge would be amazing. My concern with him, and what would be amazing about it, and this was a point I made over the summer when people were having what seems like a hilarious debate now on if they should trade Matt Barzal for Matt Duchene. And one of the big reasons I said that they shouldn't is, if Barzal pans out, which at the time was a major if, you could be looking at 3 centers basically for the price of 2 for 3 years, including this year. And that would be the situation that they would find themselves in with Nugent Hopkins if Tavares resigns. And if Tavares doesn't resign, then obviously you're still set up really nicely with a nice 1-2 combination down the middle. So it's a nice little contingency plan. My concern is he does have a $6 million contract for 3 more years, and it's like you're going to have to make some serious cap adjustments to account for that. Yeah. I'm unconvinced that Garth Snow is going to.
Yeah, I'm also a bit worried because Nuge, the Islanders have 2 players right now, and I don't think I should really call up Barzal's numbers to see how much he uses legs. I haven't in a while. But they also have a bunch of players. Hosang is the most notable one, Barzal to a lesser extent, who are very much pass first guys. And while there's nothing wrong with that in general, to be pass first, where are we here? Why am I missing it? That's what I want. Well, there's nothing wrong with that in general. You probably don't want to have too many of those guys in the same line because all of a sudden someone needs to start shooting. Yeah, Barzal's better than Hosang in this regard, and better than Nuge, but he's still not shooting as much as you'd hope from most players. And maybe he'll up that, but I suspect this is where he's going to be because he was very much like this in the juniors as well. And so, fine. It's fine with Barzal and Hosang on different lines, and though I'd be curious to see them on the same line. If you add Nuge there, and putting Nuge and Hosang on the same line, you got 2 guys who really, really look to pass first. And so I suspect the chemistry there, even if both of them independently are worth their spots, I suspect it wouldn't work.
That's fair. That's definitely a fair point. Maybe it'll teach Hosang to shoot.
Maybe. He's never really wanted to.
No.
Which is fine. I mean, again, if you pair him with a bunch of guys, like if Nelson was fine defensively, I think the Hosang-Nelson combination would be great. The problem is the defense is not there. Whereas, with Nuge, there's no shooting there.
I think that's a very fair point. The Stahl thing to me would be a perfect situation, and he actually does have a modified no trade clause. I don't know if the Islanders would be on that. I'm pretty sure they went after him.
Yeah, it's a 10-team. He chooses 10 teams to start the season. He can't be traded to. So it's a third of the league. Oh, can't be traded to without permission. I'm pretty sure he can always waive it. So I don't know if the Islanders would be on that list. I mean, the only teams that I would be stunned are on that list is I'd be stunned if Carolina's on that list because I don't imagine he has any problems going back to Carolina if they wanted him. But I don't think that. I think that ship has sailed. Um, I mean, the Islanders could be on that list. They might not be.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know he has. They were talking, or at least I think it might have been Staple had mentioned that he and Waite have a good relationship from when they played together, and obviously
they were on that Cup team.
Yep, and Ladd was on that team too, so it's not like you would, come into the situation without knowing anyone.
Right.
So I think it's certainly possible, just given the fact that this would be a situation, obviously, at the deadline, likely not too far beforehand, where, if the Islanders are still in playoff position, he knows exactly what he's walking into. The other consideration there is he can be close to his brother in New York without actually playing for the Rangers again, which, given his last experience, may not be something he wants. So I actually do think that given, I know a lot of Islander fans are like, oh, no trade clause, never mind, next. I think with him, there's actually a pretty decent chance that he would want to waive to come here. But to your point, it would really depend on if Minnesota's willing to admit that or decides to shift course and say, okay, we may not be ready to win over the next 2 years. And I'm not sure where they stand on that.
Right. Yeah. I think that's right. We obviously were trying to get Justin Williams using the Doug Waite connection also. That obviously didn't work out. Justin Williams would be great in this team right now, but alas, that ship has sailed. Yeah, I mean, again, we're probably dreaming on stalls. I think Minnesota want more than they want there. So, moving on to a bunch of players. So, those would be like the big impact guys. But moving on to a bunch of guys who would be sort of your bottom sixers who wouldn't cost as much. So we have a couple guys who I've here. Again, sticking with the Oilers, Patrick Maroon is a guy who is on a reasonable contract. He's a UFA at the end of the year. Now, it's tricky because he's played a bunch with McDavid, so you do need to remove some of that from his numbers. But even back in Anaheim, he's always been a reasonable possession player with some reasonable scoring numbers on the wing. So that's one guy who could be had reasonably, probably not too expensively. Benoit Pouliot's another type of guy like this, who obviously has played for nearly everyone, and is playing for a pretty awful Buffalo team right now, but putting up reasonable numbers. I mean, as much as anyone in Buffalo is putting up reasonable numbers, that team is truly terrible again. And so Benoit Pouliot would, I mean, again, these type of guys are guys who you probably want to get two. You can pick up two of these guys who are reasonable bottom sixers who can play and can keep you in the game with them on the ice, even if they don't win the ice time. That's a big upgrade because you have a guy like Jamero right now who is losing you whenever he's on the ice. Nelson is sort of doing that also. Beauvillier, that's so replacing them with guys like Cizikas who are keeping you even basically allows those top two guys to truly be deadly.
Yep. Agreed with that. I think that's a point that actually is an underrated point. I think that's one of the things when you look at the salary cap that, everyone obviously wants to have four dominant lines, but if you do come into a situation where you do have two that are, above average to really good lines, you really just need to fill that out with guys that aren't going to, objectively lose you games. And the point that you've been making, which I wholeheartedly agree with, is they kind of have four of those guys right now. And that to me is, and it's also the easiest spots in the lineup to upgrade, right? You talk about Pouliot and Maroon and guys like that. I think you had mentioned Matt Cullen before we went on.
Yeah.
And these are guys that you can get. You're not going to have to break the bank to bring them in, but doing things like that, I know they're not flashy, and you'll go on Twitter and it'll be like, just these guys, but they can make a big difference if they're able to pull you even, as opposed to just getting, spending 15 minutes in your own zone and tiring out your defense every game.
Yeah, I mean, I looked up Cohen and Daniel Winnick as two of the guys picking at Pittsburgh's 5 and 6s for the last couple of years, and they both are having pretty dreadful years. Both guys are old, and it looks like Cohen has fallen off a cliff, and Winnick is not much better. So, I mean, I think those guys are both probably out at this point, for what it's worth, which doesn't mean necessarily that, those are the type of guys who you should be looking at, but, those two, for example, I would not touch.
Fair enough.
I mean, it's funny, in those veins of those guys would be a guy like Colton Sevier, currently playing for Florida, who played for Dallas for a few years before that. He doesn't score a lot, but he puts up reasonable point numbers for a bottom sixer. But his possession numbers hang around even every year. They're a little bit below even for his team right now. And again, he's a free agent coming up. He's cost under $1 million. Probably not cost very much from Florida. Also, he's more of an analytics type guy, so Dale Talon probably wants to kill him for existing.
Great, just send him up to New York. It's fine. We'll take care of it from here.
The Panthers are bizarre. It's one of the dumbest things. Like, good God.
It's a good way to shoot yourself in the foot after really making some solid strides.
It really is, right? I mean, and then you've got some other guys like Matt Reed is probably available from Philly right now. I was just posting this on Twitter before the cast, but Philly is one of those teams who is almost certainly going to be in sell mode, and yet they have basically nothing worth selling. Reed is in the AHL right now and has shown some signs of decline, so he's probably worth a flyer just for what he used to be as a bottom sixer. But like the only other UFA they have for next year is Valtteri Filppula, who is expensive and is not putting up good numbers anymore. And it's just like, why would you really? You should be paid to take him. It's kind of bizarre. Those guys are available. They're available every year, and some of them are available on the waiver wire often. Listen, and the thing I always say, I said this before the season, in my off-season cast, I think I said that, to me, my focus for the off-season would have been acquiring 3 of these guys for your bottom 6, and then trying to dump Chimera and some of the other guys, and trying to dump Chimera. I think my thought in the off-season was dump Chimera, send Beauvillier to the AHL, and maybe see if we can dump Nelson and get like 3 bottom 6 guys. Obviously, they decided instead to just roll with everyone. It didn't work.
Well, that's one of the things that, again, we talk about cap management. Snow has always struggled with bottom of the lineup. Like, he doesn't know how to price them. He doesn't know how to sign them for reasonable prices. And I think you're going to get to a point now where you are going to have potentially 2 centers locked up long-term for a lot of money. Not in this year, but a couple years down the road. He's going to have to start to figure out how to gauge this market correctly. The best example of a team that did exactly what you're talking about last year is the Rangers last year. Yeah. They brought in, and this year, but they brought in Grabner and they brought in guys like Brandon Peary and a few guys that just like kind of fell at the bottom of the lineup. But what it allowed them to do, they played the right system play the right style of the system that they play, and they just went in there and essentially, quote, didn't get killed. And that's kind of the guys that the Islanders need to acquire, but not pay $5 million to bring them in.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with that. But Snow's being consistent. He was earlier in his GM days, when they were more cap constrained, and they were having to pick guys off waivers. I swear he was much better at this. And since he's gotten a little less a little more freedom with the cap, he's sort of fallen back on bad habits. Obviously, the lockout year, we had that amazing third line where you had Keith Aucoin, who was a tremendous third line center, who I think he immediately no one re-signed him the next year, and it was a clear travesty. And then you had Grabner on that third line, and you had Colin McDonald. And I'm not saying Colin McDonald's a good player, but those 3 together had a great year. And Keith Aucoin was the type of player who should be out there in a team like the Isles or the old Penguins should have been like grabbing. And then the Isles next year signed Marc Bouchard, who was a similar-ish player, who Cappy gave up on way too soon. He has gone for those guys before. It's just, and I guess Shane Prince 2 years ago, the trade for Prince was sort of going for one of those guys.
Yep. But even bringing in a guy like Tyler Kennedy, like he did a couple years ago, like that, I mean, that's a perfectly fine option to fill out the bottom of your lineup.
Yeah. Though Kennedy is one of the rare players for whom gaming core sees an actual legit argument.
He would shoot from literally anywhere.
Yes. Most of us Adelaide people tend to poo-poo those types of claims. Tyler Kennedy is none. There are a few, maybe less than 10 guys throughout the league who, yes, they literally are gaming the numbers, and they're not quite what you think. Tyler Kennedy is one of those guys.
7% career shooting percentage, killing it. That's awesome.
As a bottom sixer was not an awful option. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna be something Garth's got to relearn. They let Grabner go for nothing, which still kills me. Because at worst case he would be a fine bottom sixer, but they had the idea that he had to be a top sixer, or they had to get rid of him. And obviously the Rangers are now reaping the benefits of that.
Which, to be fair, the Islanders have definitely softened on since Wade has taken over, which thank God for that. This idea of like top six, bottom six, they don't quite subscribe to that anymore. Otherwise, I mean, you wouldn't see Ho-Sang playing in the NHL if they still did. So hopefully they're actually softening on that, and they don't feel like they're just obligated to play him. But
I think that's right. I'm still confused by the Ho-Sang demotion earlier this year because it did not fit with Ho-Sang's the lease he was given last year, and I mean his numbers weren't good, but Nelson and whatnot's numbers weren't good either, and it was a weird player to send down. I still can't believe Beauvillier is still here. I could have swore they would have sent him down, but I guess not.
That's the situation where I had a friend say this to me like a couple of weeks ago, and it kind of like I haven't forgotten it. It's like one of those statements, and he goes to me, he's like, they're developing Beauvillier to be Sean Bergenheim, and I was like, that kind of feels right, and I don't know. I feel like if he was in Bridgeport playing top minutes and hopefully scoring 50 points down there, if not more, he could develop into that 40 to 45 point player in the NHL. But if they just keep pigeonholing him on the fourth line for the first 2 years of his career, you could be looking at kind of like a Bailey situation where it ultimately delays his development for 4 or 5 years as he figures things out, because he's not. I mean, the poor guy gets like demolished every game. Like they just like rag him around, and I think a lot of that is just due to his strength, not even his size, just the fact that he's still 20 and isn't quite ready to go up in the boards against a guy like Racco Gudas, for example. I'm a little worried that they're just kind of placing a ceiling on him that isn't quite necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably right. I think Bergenheim was. I don't remember Bergenheim's advanced numbers to start this season, to start his career, because Bergenheim wound up being a very solid bottom sixer with solid possession numbers who just did not put a lot of points on in the net, which Beauvillier strikes me as being a worse bottom six possession guy who maybe learns to put some points on, get some.
Yeah, I just want him to be more offensively developed than Bergenheim was. Bergenheim, don't get me wrong, I liked him a lot when he was here, and he's another example of a guy I think they gave up on way too soon. Even at 25, I felt like there was potential there, but I feel like if he becomes Sean Bergenheim, that's obviously a great outcome for a late first rounder.
Yes.
Part of me wonders if he could be potentially more offensively minded than that if he was given the opportunity to be long term.
No, I think that's fair. I like Beauvillier shows flashes, and apparently the numbers seem to suggest he's getting better recently. The whole Nelson, Beauvillier, Ho-Sang line has gotten better recently. So we'll see. And that they really need is Sadiq is not expected to be back tomorrow, is he?
I don't think so. I didn't see anything on that today.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think they're planning on having him stay out this whole road trip and come back when they're back home in 2 games, which might be fair. But anyhow, yeah. So this team really, I think we agree that going all in. They have assets. Let's say you can trade one of your two defensemen. You can trade Nelson. You've got a bevy of defensemen in the AHL. You could definitely trade. So those Oilers players, for example, I would imagine a guy like Sebastian Aho would be very appealing to the Oilers right now, or Devin Tays. Honestly, if the Oilers were crazy, they might give us something really good for DeHaan, but I suspect they want somebody who's signed for a longer term than DeHaan is.
Right.
Defense is a good thing to have a lot of, despite what Vegas is trying to do with their defensemen, which I don't know what the hell they were trying to do with their defensemen because they weren't that good. And the Isles definitely have that, and the Isles have the Flames picks. Are the Flames in the playoff picture right now?
They're they're close, but let's see. Yeah, they are.
They are out of the playoff picture right now.
By a point, and I think they just lost in overtime. Yeah. Okay, so now they're tied for the last spot, but they've played 2 more games in San Jose.
Right. Okay, so that's not... Yeah, because obviously, depending on how bad the Flames do, the Isles could have even better assets. And I think the Flames will be fine. I think that's a very good team. They're another one of those teams that has one of these really young, insanely good lines.
Yep.
Insanely good players along with 2 other ones to make it an insanely good line in Tkachuk, Backlund, and Falik. That's like one of the better lines in the league right now. And Tkachuk has no business being that good this young. That bothers the hell out of me. It's not fair.
No, we can't say that. We just got one of those.
Well, yeah, but okay, fine, true. If you're Bruins, the Bruins actually have a rookie defenseman playing great this year, but they're looking at Barzal and being like, God damn it. And then there's the Edmonton fans who apparently I'm not sure if you've seen this, the talking point among the Edmonton pro media is that the Edmonton fans shouldn't be that upset about trading the Barzal pick because the Edmonton Oilers didn't have Barzal that high anyhow, which to me is the most amazing defense of a. So don't worry about us trading the pick. We would have blown the pick anyhow. Is an incredible defense from these basically sponsored media.
That is the I'm not fired, I quit version of sports drafting.
It's pretty incredible. I would not like to make that defense if I was trying to seriously do that, but apparently that's what the Edmonton pro media has been saying. It's pretty incredible. But just wrapping it up here, I do think you're probably right. I think they should be active. This should not be a season like last year, the couple of years before, where they decided we're sort of on the cusp, so let's not do something. They have the assets. You're right. The Barzal Tavares cap hit is not going to be any smaller anytime soon. And there are guys available. I'm sure there's plenty of guys we haven't talked about we wouldn't think about. Anything else before we head out?
No, I really appreciate you asking me to do this. This was a blast, and thank you for having me.
No problem, sir. So I'm just going to cut the stream in a second. Thanks for joining us, guys. And stream is off. And so I can kill him.